As we already saw with our verb to be previously, all verbs in Latin have person, number, tense, voice, and mood. Person is the verb first, second, or third. First person, I, we. Second person, you, y'all. Third person, he, she, it, they. Number, singular or plural, right? So is it I or we, you or y'all, he, she, it, or they? Tense is when the verb takes place. Is it present, imperfect, future, etc.? Voice is active or passive. So is the subject performing the action of the verb, or is the action of the verb happening to the subject, right? So I kick the ball, that's a active verb. I am kicked, oh no, that's horrible, is a passive verb, right? So is the subject performing the action, or is the subject receiving the action of the verb? And last is mood, indicative, subjunctive, or imperative. Indicative is what we use to talk about facts, right? Basic statements. Subjunctive is what we use to talk about wishes, dreams, conditionals, and imperative is commands. So far we've only been in the indicative mood, although you have been around imperatives, right? This is what we use when we say salve or salvete, right? Be well, or y'all be well. In order to express person, number, tense, voice, and mood, we must conjugate our verbs. So we decline nouns and conjugate verbs. So remember when we were working with our nouns, we would decline them so we could, or basically we would change the endings, right, which is declining, so that we could show the noun acting differently in the sentence, right? Being a subject versus a direct object versus the object of a preposition. So just as nouns are organized in declensions, verbs are organized in conjugations. And the nouns within a certain conjugation will conjugate in the same way. They'll use the same pattern. So not at all dissimilar from what we've seen with our nouns. It's just instead of declining, as we do for nouns, we will now be conjugating our verbs. So we already saw with our verb to be how important principal parts are in Latin. So there are four principal parts in Latin, right? We saw with the verb to be, sum, esse, fui, futurus. And these four principal parts are what we need to know. It's the information we need so that we can conjugate the verb in any tense, voice, mood, right? These are the building blocks of the verb. And we have these in we have these in English too. You just might not think about them if you're a native English speaker, right? Think about irregular verbs. Those are probably the ones you've memorized, like drink, drank, drunk, ran, run, run, swim, swam, swum, right? Swim, swam, swum. Those are the principal parts of the verb to swim, right? So in Latin, we have four principal parts, and we're going to memorize all of them, even though we don't necessarily know how to use them yet. Trust me, memorize them now, and when we get down the line, you will be very happy with the work your past self has done. So let's look at the first principal part, or the four principal parts of the first conjugation. And luckily for us, the principal parts of the first conjugation are very, very regular. I've got the endings highlighted here. Ambulo, ambulare, ambulavi, ambulatus. Right? You see the O is highlighted, ARE, avi, atus. And that's exactly what you see for the next verb, which means to sing, right? Canto, cantare, cantavi, cantatus. We see a similar pattern yet again when we go to the verb to give. Dono, donare, donavi, donatus. Again, laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatus. Libero, liberare, liberavi, liberatus. So what you're probably noticing is that for any regular verb in the first conjugation, which is most of them, if you take the first principal part and just keep the stem, right, which is everything that comes before the O, right? The O is the first person present ending. Then you can add are, avi, atus, and you will have the four principal parts. Just to assuage your curiosity, I'm sure you want to just have a brief look at what these four principal parts mean. So ambulo, that is our first person singular present active indicative. So that form we can translate I walk, I sing, I give, etc. Ambulare, the ARE version, the second principal part, is the present active infinitive. To walk, to sing, to give. The third principal part is our first person singular perfect active indicative. So perfect is a past tense. So kind of like the imperfect, it has a slightly different translation. So here we would translate this as I walked, I sang, I gave. Right? And last but not least, we have our perfect passive participle, which is the fourth principal part. And this is translated as having been walked, having been sung, having been given. The perfect passive participle is something that English doesn't use overly much, but Latin makes good use of. So there you have a brief look at our four principal parts. And do not worry, we'll learn more and more and more about these as we go along. But I wanted to give you a snapshot into the future. As you looking through your vocabulary list, I want to draw your attention to one special verb, the verb to give, do, dare, dedi, datus. And you're noticing right away that it's irregular, right? It doesn't create its four principal parts in the exact same way as all of the other verbs. There's not very many irregular verbs like this in the first conjugation, but there are a few. So for the verb to give, do, dare, dedi, datus, you simply have to remember the four principal parts. So make sure to commit them to memory. And even for this one, even though it is irregular, we're noticing that it's really only the third principal part that's a little bit different. So let's conjugate. So here we will take the verb to walk, ambulo, ambulare, ambulavi, ambulatus, and to conjugate it in the present active indicative, we'll take our stem, ambul, A-M-B-U-L, and we will add our endings. Ambulo, I walk. Ambulas, you walk. Ambulat, she, he, it walks. Ambulamus, we walk. Ambulatis, you all walk. Ambulant, they walk. We could also translate this, I am walking, you are walking, she, he, it is walking, we are walking, y'all are walking, they are walking. So you have two options for translation there. Now, the basic endings, o, s, t, mus, tis, inti, are ones that we will see throughout all the conjugations we meet, and we'll meet the rest of them in our next unit. The a is special to the first conjugation. Let's see a few more verbs, and we'll really notice this pattern. Now we take the verb that means to sing, canto, cantare, cantavi, cantatus, and we will conjugate it in the present active indicative. Canto, cantas, cantat, cantamus, cantatis, cantant. Now here, let's draw our attention to our macrons. Notice that we have a long O in the first person singular, canto, and that we have a long A in 3 places. The second person singular, cantas, the first person plural, cantamus, and the second person plural, cantatis. And those long marks will be in the same place for all first conjugation verbs, right? They are regular, so it's something that we can memorize as part of our verb information. Now here you can see that I have just the endings highlighted. O-S-T, mus, tis, inti. I want you to make a special effort to memorize this. O-S-T, mus, tis, inti. As I said, all of the conjugations will use these basic endings. So memorize them now. O-S-T, mus, tis, inti. Of course, also memorize the vowels, but make special effort to get this locked into your head because you'll see it over and over again throughout Latin. This is an important repeating pattern. O-S-T, mus, tis, inti. And since we talked about it being irregular, I thought let's go ahead and conjugate do, dare, dedi, datus in the first person present so we can see that here it's perfectly regular. Do, das, dat, damus, datis, dant. Now let's have a look at a few sentences. Semper canto cum coro. What does this mean? Semper canto cum coro. Okay. I know I'm the subject because I've got an O at the end of canto. I always sing with the choir. Another sentence. Nunc regina orat cum famulis. Nunc regina orat cum famulis. So here I look at orat, my verb, third person singular. And that's how I know that the subject must be regina, that is in the nominative singular. So now the queen is praying, or now the queen prays with the servants. Merito viam domini ambulant. So here we have a sentence that could be a little tricky. Merito viam domini ambulant. So we look at our verb, ambulant, and we know that we've got a third person plural subject. And we're looking through the sentence and we see domini. Okay, by form, domini could be nominative plural, vocative plural, or it could be genitive singular. So our first thought might be, well, could this be the subject? Then we put that together and we say, rightly, the Lords walk the path. That's not quite right. We don't normally, we wouldn't want domini. The Lords aren't plural, it's singular. And we think about our genitive option. Well, the way of the Lord, well, that makes perfect sense. And that might fit even nicer and even more nicely into our sentence. So this is something we have to do sometimes in Latin, is consider a couple of different options and think of which one would be the very best. Remembering always that it's perfectly fine to leave our subject understood, right? It doesn't have to be stated in the sentence because the subject is built into the verb. So here we have, rightly, they walk the way of the Lord. Merito viam domini ambulant.